Hello, this is Eve Stanway, and welcome to episode 12 of my podcast, Dare to Speak Difficult Conversations That Can Change Everything. So, in this episode, I'm going to talk about fear. It's the fear that sits behind arguments. Now, fear is an interesting component of everyday life. Actually, fear is very useful because fear is something that we've evolved over time which keeps us safe. It can help us avoid taking a risk. It can guide us to safety, sometimes without us even realizing it, when something stops us from stepping out into the road because we haven't seen that there's a car coming. But maybe our brains picked it up, it heard it, and it knew that it wasn't the right thing to do. Fear is a really important part of difficult conversations. It's part of what keeps us silent. And very often that fear is the fear that something will be much, much worse if we say something, if we talk, if we say what's bothering us. Sometimes it's the fear of sheer hopelessness. What is the point? I keep asking for that. It never happens. Sometimes it's the fear that if I say how I truly feel, I'll be rejected. They won't care. They won't be that bothered. Sometimes it's the fear that if I ask them to do it, they won't do it. And that's going to make me feel unimportant. So it's easier for me to just do it myself. Sometimes it's the fear of work. We see this quite a lot with people who are, sometimes they feel reluctant to show other people how to do something. This can be a really important thing when it comes to young adults and children. What's the point of trying to get kids to do chores or help us around the house? They won't do it and we'll end up having to do it, or they'll do it badly. This is that idea of almost weaponized incompetence. But sometimes it's real incompetence because somebody hasn't had the chance to learn. Sometimes it's because they're disinclined to learn. Sometimes fear is genuine fear because what the other person might say to us if we dare to speak will really hurt us. They'll say something absolutely awful or unkind, or we feel that they'll leave us, that we'll be abandoned, or that they won't like us, that we'll break something by having that conversation, and that whatever we break, we'll never be able to get back. Sometimes the fear is the fear that we are just a bad person. I see this a lot with people who procrastinate. They call themselves lazy. They give themselves that label of lazy because they said they'd do something and they're not doing it. Or because they didn't start doing something that they said they were going to do. Or perhaps they said that they were going to meet up with somebody and they just felt overwhelmed. They didn't really feel like they wanted to go. So they call themselves lazy. Oh, I'm really lazy. I should have gone. I'm lazy. I don't go to the gym. I'm lazy that I'm not writing that thing that I should be writing. I'm lazy because I didn't tidy up or make my bed or even get out of bed or do my yoga or do my stretches or take some exercise. So what happens is these all circle around this idea of fear. Fear of the future, fear of what might happen. And Elizabeth Gilbert, in her book Big Magic, which I do recommend anybody to read, she talks about fear, fear of writing, fear of creativity. And it's very interesting what she says. She says that fear is something that we have to take with us. It's something that lives with us, that we have to get used to having in our lives because it's incredibly important to have fear to keep us safe. But what can happen is that fear can get into the driving seat. And fear usually is just designed to keep us alive, but it doesn't actually necessarily, or very often actually, know what the big picture is. So what can happen is that we can become in conflict with our fear. I know I should talk to this person about that thing, but I'm scared. I'm scared of what will happen. I'm scared of what the outcome is. I'm scared how they'll take it. I'm scared in case they're upset, offended, annoyed, angry, distressed, sad. So we become fearful and we stop doing it. So what do we do about that? Well, First of all, it's understanding that fear of difficult conversations, fear of change actually is really, really common. And that's because no matter how comfortable our situation, sorry, how uncomfortable our situation is, the unknown is going to be potentially more uncomfortable. It can also, I slipped up with my tongue there, but the reality is how comfortable a situation is. We can feel this is really comfy. I don't want to rock the boat. I don't want to make any changes. I don't want to do anything that might leave me worse off. So there's that fear of being worse off. So fear is a really big part of difficult conversations, and it's part of what I talked about in my previous episode about kitchen sinking. It's part of what causes conflict between us and our young adults, which is something that I'm going to talk about in my next book a lot. Because we're frightened of what they might be doing when they're going out or when they're exploring or when they're doing things that we're thinking, oh gosh, I know I did that when I was young, but I don't want my kids doing those things. So we're scared. We're scared of what might happen. And what happens with that fear is that it means that our conversations are changed by the fear. Either we avoid it completely and we refuse to talk about it. I used to see this with clients bringing their children to have the talk, bringing them to me to have the talk about sex or drugs or rock and roll and the dangers of life because they were scared of getting it wrong, but they were scared of broaching the subject. They were scared of the awkwardness. They were scared that there would be a big mistake. I see this when people are talking to their children about separation and divorce. They're frightened. I even see it with couples who are scared to go to mediation or scared to go and get some clarity on what the situation is because they're frightened of what the information might tell them. And so what happens is that they sit without the necessary information, managing the fear of not knowing, managing the fear of not speaking, because it feels that little bit safer than the fear of speaking out. So the fear that lies beneath an argument, the fear that prevents us stepping into a difficult conversation, the fear of a difference of opinion. What if I tell that person what I really think and that ends our relationship? What if I share with my child how anxious I feel about the decisions they're making and they shut down and won't talk to me anymore? Or furthermore, what if I tell them what I'm scared and anxious about the decisions they're making, and they do it anyway? And I have to deal with that uncertainty. Or the sheer sadness that comes when somebody makes a decision that we could see it probably wasn't going to be a good idea, but they needed to make that decision in order to learn a lesson. This can really happen if we've got a friend or a family member who's entered into a relationship with somebody else who's really difficult. Perhaps we can see them suffering. Perhaps we can see them changing in front of our eyes because they're in that difficult relationship where they're no longer being themselves. This can be really heartbreaking if it's your adult child who's got into a relationship with someone and you can see that it's unhealthy. Perhaps it's mirroring your own relationship that you had when you were younger or in the past with their own parent, for example. That can be it can be really stressful. It can be frightening. And that fear often means that we lead with fear in the conversation. This is going to need to be an edit where we're just going to need to go into the next thing because I received a phone call. So we can lead with fear into the conversation, and this is where clarify, communicate, and correct really, really help. So when we clarify what is it that is the matter of concern, I'm really anxious because my adult child, is got a job where they have to travel home late at night by themselves. And I'm scared for them. I'd like them to ensure that they take a cab home, even if it means I pay for the cab. But how we say it to them really matters. Because often when we are communicating this stuff, we're letting, for instance, with an adult child going, well, I don't trust your ability to make the right decision, so I'm going to tell you what you need to do. Often that will just get met with complete rebuttal. So clarify, what is it I want to say? I want to say, I'm feeling really anxious at the news that you'll be traveling home, and I need some help with my anxiety, which is my responsibility and what I need to deal with, but I could really do with some help. Please, can I talk about how I'm feeling? I understand that you will be seeing it from a really different point of view, and perhaps you're not scared, you're not worried about that journey home. Perhaps even you've made plans, because actually I have raised you to be quite sensible, and I'd really like to be able to talk about it. Because when we approach it in that way, when we're thinking about what it is that we really want to say, very often what will happen is our young adult will say, "Oh, mum, I've already thought about that. I completely want to stay safe too. And I've arranged to travel home with somebody, or I've arranged to get that they're going to give me a cab home." Or they might say, "Gosh, I hadn't really thought about that, but you're right." Because when we approach it with clarity, talking about it in the right way, it's much more likely the other person is going to listen. If we come at it with all of our fear because we want to persuade them that the thing we're scared of, they should be scared of too, the chances are they're going to feel overwhelmed and push us back. Sometimes, say we're scared because we need to speak to an older adult because we're concerned. Perhaps we're concerned because we want to say, I think it would be a good idea to put a power of attorney in place or a will. But we're frightened that we might look like we're trying to control them, or they, even worse, that we're worried that they're going to get scared of us, that somehow we want to take away their autonomy, whereas we don't. We just want to help them. And I will just send a note out there: if you haven't got power of attorney and wills in place, please go get them done. It's so important. It makes such a big difference. But because we're frightened of how they might react or they might respond, it causes us to step back from the conversation, and either we approach it in a clumsy way, which causes conflict or shutdown, where we don't get to where we want to go, or it just escalates and we end up creating a bad subject. It becomes a difficult conversation that we can't broach. There's nothing we can do about it. So by being really clear, I want to talk to you about something that I'm concerned about. I'm worried because I've started worrying about legacy in the future and what might happen in the future. And I really want to be able to have a conversation with you about it. Can I share how I'm feeling? I'd really like to. And then when they go, "Oh, I don't want to talk about things like that," go, "I completely understand. I get that. I just want to talk about how I'm feeling." Because I think by sharing how I'm feeling on this subject, it would help bring us closer. I'm not going to try and persuade you to do something. I just want to tell you what I'm worrying about. And then perhaps they say, "Well, you don't need to worry about that. I've got it in hand." And then we can say, "I expect that you have, because you are pretty sensible actually, and you do things, you do think things through. It would really help my anxiety if you don't mind sharing what your ideas are, just so that I can stop worrying." Now, we might have to accept the fact that they won't share their ideas because they don't care whether we're worrying. Maybe we're in a difficult relationship and they want us to worry. They're deliberately using a lack of clarity in order to create anxiety, because obviously emotions are a really good way of controlling somebody. Or it may be that they simply hadn't realized that we feel emotionally vulnerable worrying about this situation, and all we're looking for is clarity. So, what becomes a difficult shutdown conversation, a conversation full of fear and worry and doubt, can become a really productive conversation, which leads to clarity and the sharing of information, and most of all, reassurance. Because here's the thing: in a healthy relationship, it's very, very normal to care about each other. It's incredibly lovely to have somebody who's looking out for you, somebody who is worried that you're okay, somebody who wants to make sure that you're safe and you're well and you're okay. It's not a bad thing. That's a kind of good thing. So many people who don't have somebody in their lives really would like somebody that cares about them. But the manner in which we have those conversations of caring really makes a difference. to whether or not we can bear to have them, whether or not caring becomes overbearing and becomes difficult, or whether it becomes healthy and connecting and a sign of love and affection. Because, of course, we love our adult children and we're worrying about them because we want them to be around. We want them to be safe, and that's a good thing. But how we go about communicating that, especially if we're scared of having those conversations or we're in the habit of them going wrong, really, really does matter. We love our older adults. We want them to be safe. We want to be in a position to help them and make sure things happen the way they want them to happen. So having a good conversation about powers of attorneys or wills or estate planning or what happens next is a really, really good idea. But so often people don't have those conversations because they're in a state of fear and anxiety. And that's precisely what we want to see if we can avoid by using these simple tools to have the conversation in a way that flows and creates connection, that doesn't cause shaming and blaming and shut down. I'm going to talk in future episodes a lot about fear and how fear works. So to finish, Elizabeth Gilbert says we should take fear and we should still listen to it, but we should put it in the back seat. We shouldn't let it drive. As she says, we should never let it be in charge of the radio. We need our fear because sometimes our fear is saying, I'm a bit anxious about that thing. But we try not to let fear guide the conversation. We don't let fear be in charge of what we say and what we do. Fear is really useful as a signpost. It really, really is. It keeps us safe, and we need to be able to listen to fear and worry and doubt. We really, really do. But what we do is that we listen to them and then we go and take a look for ourselves. We go and see what's happening here. What am I scared of? Is it something that I need to be scared of? In my next episode, I'm going to talk about triggers. Triggers are a really important part of this fear conversation because a trigger is when we are triggered into overwhelm, and that often means that we're shifting from the present into reenacting or reliving something that happened in the past. So triggers are a really important part of the conversation about fear, and I'm going to talk about that in the next episode. So thank you for your time today. If what we spoke about today resonated with you, please give me a like. Reviews mean so much because it allows this podcast to reach more people. And these are situations, these are things that people are listening. They're sitting by themselves, and that's why I chose to put together a podcast so that people can to know they're not alone, know that how they're feeling is other people are feeling these ways too. So please do like, please do share, please do subscribe on whatever platform you happen to be listening on. And please do get in touch, book a call, have a chat with me. I'd love to hear from you if you're listening to this episode or this podcast about your thoughts and feelings about it. I really would. Go to my website at www.evestanway.co.uk, book a chat. Let's have a call about it. I'd really like to know because that will help me feed the topics as we go forwards. But thank you for your time today. And I look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Dare to Speak, Difficult Conversations That Can Change Everything. Thank you.